The sky above the quarantined preserve world of Karis 7 was a bruised, vibrant teal, stretching tight over a horizon that looked deceptively peaceful. From orbit, the planet appeared to be a jewel of emerald and aquamarine, swirled with white cloud formations that masked the violence below. But down on the surface, the humidity was a physical weight, pressing against the lungs with the scent of crushed ferns, ozone, and ancient, wet stone. This was not a world meant for habitation. It was a cage. Enormous trees with bark like black iron twisted toward the sun, their canopies woven so thick that the light filtering down was stained a sickly green. Between the roots lay the ruins of a civilization that had died 10,000 years ago. Their stone ziggurats and crumbling archways now choked by vines that pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent rhythm. The silence of the jungle was heavy, broken only by the distant shriek of winged predators and the low, constant thrum of the invisible sensor grids that netted the entire hemisphere. High above this green hell, the imperial yacht Gilded Talon drifted in a geosynchronous hold. It was a sleek dagger of a ship, white gold and glass, designed for luxury viewing. On the observation deck, the air smelled of expensive perfume and chilled blue wine. The elite of the empire, beings of tall stature and iridescent skin, mingled with the casual arrogance of those who had never known what it meant to be hunted. Floating drone cameras, shaped like silent silver orbs, hovered around the perimeter of the deck, broadcasting the view of the surface to the guests and to select private channels across the sector. Princess Valeira stood at the edge of the viewing platform, her back to the party, staring down at the jungle that waited for her. She was a vision of lethal perfection. Her bio-armor, a living symbiotic skin that shifted color from pearl to midnight blue depending on her mood, clung to her lithe frame like a second epidermis. Currently, it shimmered a regal violet, matching the ceremonial markings painted beneath her luminous gold-flecked eyes. She raised a hand, and the heavy crystal goblet she held caught the light. On her fingers, rings made from the polished fangs of previous kills glinted, trophies of beasts, not people. Until today, the crowd quieted as she turned. Valeira possessed a magnetic gravity that had nothing to do with her royal blood and everything to do with the way she moved, fluid, predatory, and absolutely assured of her place at the top of the food chain. "My friends," she said, her voice a melodic purr that carried without amplification. "Today we celebrate not just a promotion, but a return to the purity of our ancestors. We have conquered the stars with math and antimatter. We have sanitized our cities and automated our wars. But in doing so, have we not lost the edge that made us sharp?" She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the generals and aristocrats who hung on her every word. A small, cruel smile touched her lips. "Humanity," she continued, gesturing toward the planet below with her glass. "They are a messy, desperate species, unpolished chaos. They breed in the dirt and fight with the desperation of rats. To hunt them is not merely sport. It is an act of aesthetic cleansing. It is a reminder that order must always discipline chaos. Today, I do not just kill, I sculpt." The audience rippled with appreciative laughter and applause. Glasses were raised. Bets were tapped into wrist computers, odds flashing on holographic displays. They were wagering on survival times, on kill methods, on how many refugees would fall to the hounds before the princess even drew her weapon. Valeira took a sip of her wine, her eyes cold and bright over the rim. "Let the chaos run," she whispered to herself. "It makes the silence afterwards so much sweeter." Down on the surface, the chaos had already begun. The transport shuttle had dumped its cargo in a clearing 3 miles south of the primary ruins. The ramp had hissed open, and 50 confused, terrified humans had been shoved out into the mud by automated sentry drones. The shuttle lifted away immediately, leaving them in the sweltering heat of the jungle. Panic was immediate. These were not soldiers. They were refugees plucked from the fringes of the occupation zones, mechanics, farmers, teachers, people who had spent the last decade running from the Empire's expansion. A woman fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. An older man shouted at the retreating shuttle, his voice cracking with futile rage. Near the edge of the group, standing in the shadow of a massive fern, Jace Kincaid watched the shuttle disappear. He did not shout. He did not cry. He stood with a stillness that seemed unnatural amidst the frantic movement of the others. Jace looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in a sandstorm. His face was a map of old violence, a jagged scar running from his left temple to his jaw, interrupting a heavy stubble that did little to hide the hard set of his mouth. He wore a patched flight suit that had seen better days, grease-stained and frayed at the cuffs. To the casual observer, he was just another piece of wreckage from the war. A child, no older than 7, stumbled past him, hyperventilating. Jace moved, not with a sudden jerk, but with a fluid, grounded swiftness. He caught the boy by the shoulder, dropping to one knee so they were eye level. "Breathe," Jace said. The command was soft but absolute. "Look at me. Close your mouth. Breathe through your nose." The boy stared at him, eyes wide and wet, but he obeyed. The panic hiccuped and stalled. "Good," Jace said. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a small, nutrient-dense bar, pressing it into the boy's hand. "Stay with the tall woman in the gray coat. Do not make noise. Do not run in a straight line. Do you understand?" The boy nodded, clutching the food like a lifeline, and scrambled away toward the center of the group. Jace stood up, his eyes scanning the canopy. He wasn't looking for rescue. He was looking for geometry. He watched the way the light broke through the leaves, calculating the patrol patterns of the drone cameras he knew were already circling. He tapped the center of his right palm with his thumb. Under the skin, a microscopic transfer chip hummed with a faint warmth. He checked the hidden neural shunt behind his ear, feeling the hard lump of the implant that was currently dormant. He was not here by accident. He had spent 6 months dropping crumbs of data in the darkest corners of the sector, making himself look like a high-value smuggler with ties to the resistance, just to get arrested by the right patrol. He had let them drag him in chains to the transport. He had let them strip him of his weapons. But they hadn't stripped him of his mind, and they hadn't found the tech buried in his nervous system. The Empire thought this was a game reserve. Jace Kincaid knew it was a crime scene, and he was the forensic team, high above, inside the dropship that was now descending from the yacht. Valira sat in her command chair, the interior lit by the red glow of tactical displays. Her helmet was off, resting on her knee. She watched the holographic projection of the prey cluster in the clearing. Her personal guard, 2 towering warriors in matte black armor, stood silent behind her. At her feet, the hounds paced. They were nightmares of genetic engineering, sleek, hairless quadrupeds with muscle fibers visible beneath translucent skin, their heads encased in sensory domes that had no eyes, only olfactory vents designed to track the pheromones of terror. Valira swiped her hand through the hologram, spinning the display. She ignored the sobbing woman. She ignored the shouting man. Her finger paused, hovering over the image of the scarred man standing near the tree line. "Zoom," she commanded. The image expanded, resolving into the gritty resolution of Jace Kincaid's face. The biometrics scrolled beside his head. Heart rate, 55 beats per minute. Cortisol levels, negligible. While the rest of the herd was spiking with adrenaline, this human's biology was reading as if he were waiting for a bus. Interesting, Valera murmured. She leaned forward, tracing the line of his scar on the hologram. He is not afraid, or he is too stupid to understand what is happening. She looked at the biometrics again. No, not stupid. He was scanning the tree line. He was checking the sun's position. I want that one, she said, a playful darkness entering her tone. She tapped his image, marking him with a crimson rune. The rest are for the hounds and the guards, but the one with the scar, he is mine. She stood up, lifting her helmet. As she slid it over her head, the bioarmor sealed with a wet hiss. Her vision shifted, overlaid with thermal gradients and targeting reticles. She felt the thrill rise in her blood, the ancient, intoxicating song of the hunt. Release the hounds, Valera ordered. The dropship doors blasted open, and the jungle floor rushed up to meet them. The sound of the hounds was not a bark. It was a mechanical shriek, like metal tearing under stress, amplified by the humid air. It echoed through the clearing, shattering the last of the refugees' composure. They scattered. It was exactly what the hunters wanted. Prey panic, blind and chaotic, breaking into smaller groups that could be run down individually. People crashed through the undergrowth, tearing their clothes on thorns, splashing through shallow streams, screaming as the silver shapes of the hounds blurred through the trees after them. Jace did not run. He moved. There was a difference. He waited until the first wave of hounds committed to the main group. Then he broke left, heading toward the denser vegetation near the river. He kept low, his center of gravity close to the earth, moving with a silence that had taken him 20 years of warfare to master. He heard the heavy thud of boots hitting the ground behind him. The hunters had landed. A plasma lance sizzled through the air, vaporizing a tree branch inches from his head. The smell of burnt wood was acrid and sharp. Jace slid down a muddy embankment, rolling to his feet at the bottom. He grabbed a handful of blue moss from a rotting log, cryo fern. He recognized it from the briefing files he had memorized. It was full of nitrogen-rich sap that lowered surface temperature. He scrubbed it ruthlessly over his neck, his armpits, and his chest. It burned like ice, but it would mask his heat signature from the cheaper thermal optics the guards used. He saw 3 other humans huddled under the root system of a massive tree, paralyzed by fear. One was a young girl, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "Get up," Jace hissed, grabbing the nearest man by the collar. "If you stay here, you die. Coat yourselves in the blue moss. Move toward the river. The water masks the scent. Go." They stared at him, stunned by his authority. He didn't wait for them to agree. He shoved the man toward the moss and turned, sprinting away to draw the fire. High above, the drone cameras dipped and weaved, broadcasting the slaughter. In the orbiting yacht, the aristocrats cheered as Valera vaulted over a fallen log, her movement more like dance than combat. She was laughing. Through the eyes of the drones, the viewers saw her extend a wrist-mounted lance. A beam of golden energy lashed out, striking a fleeing refugee in the leg. The man tumbled, screaming. It was a stun setting, painful, paralyzing, but not lethal. Valera didn't kill quickly. That was poor showmanship. She leaped over him, using his prone body as a springboard to launch herself higher into the trees, pursuing the unique signature she had tagged earlier. She was fast, faster than any human. But Jace had the terrain. He scrambled up a rocky incline, his boots finding purchase on the slick stone. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small, jury-rigged device he had assembled from the shuttle's waste disposal unit before they landed. It was a crude acoustic emitter. He jammed it into a crevice in the rock and armed it. 3 seconds later, It let out a high-frequency pulse that mimicked the distress call of a hound alpha. Below him, two of the biomechanical beasts skidded to a halt, their sensory heads whipping around, confused by the false signal. They abandoned Jace's trail and doubled back, growling at the phantom noise. Jace didn't stop to admire his handiwork. He crested the ridge and dropped into the canyon beyond. The roar of a waterfall thundered ahead, masking the sound of his boots. He needed to get to the sensor node he had spotted on the descent. If he could tap into it, he could begin the real mission. He reached the edge of the waterfall, a curtain of white water plunging 200 feet into a misty pool. The spray soaked him instantly, washing away the sweat and some of the blue sap. He scanned the cliff wall. There, a metallic protrusion half buried in vines. A Class 4 relay node. He was reaching for it when the air behind him shimmered. Jace spun, crouching, a jagged stone in his hand. Valira stood there. She had seemingly materialized out of the mist, her armor glistening with moisture. She wasn't aiming a weapon. She was just standing there, head cocked to the side, watching him. The distance between them was less than 10 meters. The roar of the waterfall created a wall of sound, isolating them from the rest of the jungle. Jace tensed, waiting for the plasma bolt. Instead, Valira raised her left gauntlet. A small launcher popped open. There was a thwip sound, and a heavy weighted net exploded outward. Jace dove, but he was half a second too slow. The net hit him midair, wrapping around his torso and legs. As he hit the wet stone, the magnetic nodes in the mesh locked together, pinning him to the ground with the force of a gravity clamp. He gritted his teeth, straining against the bonds. The mesh hummed with energy, tightening every time he moved. Valira walked toward him slowly, her steps silent. She stopped directly over him, looking down. With a hiss of depressurization, her helmet retracted, folding back into the collar of her armor. For the first time, Jace saw the face of the monster. She was terrifyingly beautiful. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, faint violet veins tracing patterns along her high cheekbones. Her eyes were large, gold and feline, with vertical slit pupils that dilated as she looked at him. A row of small, sharp piercings lined the ridge of her ear. She looked alien, regal, and utterly dangerous. She leaned down, her face inches from his. He could smell her, not sweat and dirt, but something cool and sharp, like mint and ozone. "You are slippery," she said. Her common was accented, lilting and formal. "Most of your kind just run until their hearts burst. You create diversions." Jace stopped struggling. He lay flat, looking up at her with a cold, steady gaze. He didn't blink. "And you," Jace rasped, his voice flat, "play with your food because you have no appetite for a real fight." Valira blinked. The prey did not usually speak back, certainly not with insults. Her eyes narrowed, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward. "A real fight?" she asked, amusement coloring her tone. "You are bound in a net at my feet, little human. This was not a fight. It was a collection." Jace managed a dry, humorless chuckle. "If this is how you collect trophies, I feel sorry for your dusting droids. It's a bit messy, isn't it?" Valera laughed. It was a genuine sound, bright and startling against the backdrop of the jungle. She straightened up, looking him over with renewed interest. "You have spirit," she said, "and a mouth. I like that. It makes the silence when you finally break so much more profound." She stepped back, turning slightly to check her wrist display. "I think I will keep you for the finale. The sun sets in 3 hours. Run for me again. Human. Make it interesting. And perhaps I will let you live long enough to see the moons rise." She reached for her belt to deactivate the net, intending to give him a head start, a cruel mercy. Jace watched her hand. Now. He flexed his right hand, trapped against his chest by the net. The transfer chip in his palm flared hot. He wasn't trying to break the net. He was broadcasting a tight beam override code he had stolen from a dead guard on the transport. The magnetic mesh flickered. For a microsecond, the power cut out. Jace didn't waste the glitch on an escape. He rolled, jamming his shoulder against the rock wall where the sensor node was buried. His subdermal implant linked with the node instantly. Accessing, encryption bypass active, injecting payload alpha. The upload took less than 2 seconds. Valira's armor HUD flickered. A line of static distorted her vision, a gray ghost in the machine. She frowned, tapping the side of her collar. "What was that?" she muttered, looking around. Jace lay still as the net re-engaged, feigning exhaustion. He hid the triumphant gleam in his eyes behind a mask of defeat. "Just the damp," Jace wheezed. "Cheap Imperial tech. You get what you pay for." Valira looked down at him, suspicion warring with arrogance. She checked her diagnostics. Green across the board. The glitch was gone. She dismissed it. Why would she suspect a refugee in a net could hack military-grade bioarmor? She tapped the release on her gauntlet. The net deactivated, the magnetic locks snapping open. "Go," she commanded, pointing toward the deep jungle. "Do not disappoint me." Jace scrambled up, rubbing his bruised ribs. He looked at her one last time, a long, measuring look that Valira mistook for fear. It was not fear. It was target acquisition. He turned and ran into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. Valira watched him go, smiling. She waited 10 seconds, then 60. She replaced her helmet, the faceplate sliding shut. "Let the game continue," she whispered. Night fell over Karis 7 like a heavy blanket. The teal sky deepened to a bruised purple, and then to a starless black, illuminated only by the faint bioluminescent glow of the fungus clinging to the ruins. High in orbit, the party on the Gilded Talon was in full swing. The guests were re-watching the highlight clips of the day on massive holographic screens. They cheered as a hound took down a runner in the wetlands. They toasted as Valira performed an acrobatic takedown of a resistance fighter. But down on the surface, the dynamic had shifted. Jace was not running. He was crouching in the hollow of a massive dead tree root, 5 miles from where Valira had released him. He was not alone. He had gathered 4 other men and women, the ones who had listened, the ones who had the eyes of soldiers. They were huddled around him, watching as he worked on the exposed circuitry of a sensor pylon. He had stripped the casing with a rock and was rewiring the feed using a length of copper he'd pulled from his own flight suit. "This is insane," one of the men whispered. His name was Davin, a miner from the asteroid belt. "If they catch us tampering with the grid, they're going to kill us anyway." "Davin," Jace said, his voice low and steady. He twisted 2 wires together and a spark jumped. "Look, we're not just surviving tonight, we're changing the channel." "What does that mean?" the young girl asked. She was still clutching the food bar Jace had given her. "It means," Jace said, snapping the panel back into place, "that tomorrow, when the princess turns on her cameras to show off her kill, she's going to be broadcasting on a wide band frequency, unencrypted, to every receiver in the system." He looked at them, his scarred face illuminated by the faint blue light of the pylon. "We're going to show them what this really looks like. Not the edited version. The blood, the fear, the reality." The pylon hummed, the light turning from amber to a steady, pulsing green. The trap was set. "Get some sleep," Jace told them. "We move at first light." He moved away from the group, sitting guard at the entrance of the hollow. He checked his implants again. The diagnostic showed the upload was dormant, waiting for the trigger. He looked up at the patch of sky visible through the leaves. Somewhere up there. Valera was probably sleeping in a silk bed, dreaming of the hunt. Jace touched the scar on his jaw. Sleep well, princess, he thought. You have a big day tomorrow. Dawn broke with a sullen gray light. The mist was thick, clinging to the ground like wet wool. Valera woke in her field camp, a modular pavilion set up on a high plateau overlooking the ruins. She did not need much sleep. Her biology was efficient. She rose and walked to the mirror stand. She stripped off the upper layer of her armor, exposing her pale skin to the damp air. On a small tray lay a pot of ceremonial paint, crushed obsidian mixed with oil. She dipped her fingers into the black paste. Slowly, deliberately. She drew 2 thick lines across her cheekbones and a vertical stripe down her chin. This was not the decorative makeup of the party. This was the mark of the deep hunt, the kahalvak, the commitment to a kill that would define a warrior's soul. She had tracked the human's movements all night via the thermal residue he left behind. He was clever, but he was biological. He left heat. He left disturbed spores. Valera suited up, the bioarmor sealing tighter than before. She checked her weapons, the plasma lance, the wrist blades, the magnetic bolus. She dismissed her guards. Stay here, she ordered. The man with the scar is mine alone. Do not interfere. The guards bowed and stepped back. Valera walked to the edge of the plateau and looked down into the sea of green mist. She felt a thrill of anticipation sharper than anything she had felt in years. He was out there, waiting. She leaped from the ledge, her gravity dampeners flaring as she plummeted toward the canopy. Jace was waiting. He was deep in the unmonitored sector, a place where the ancient ruins were unstable and the sensor grid was patchy. It was a zone called the Dead City, a labyrinth of crumbling stone walls and treacherous sinkholes. He stood in the center of a wide, moss-covered plaza, surrounded by toppled pillars. He wasn't hiding. He was standing in plain sight. He heard the rustle of leaves before he saw her. Valera emerged from the mist like a wraith. The black paint on her face made her eyes look brighter, more inhuman. She moved with a deadly grace, her plasma lance held loosely at her side. She stopped 20 meters away. She smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who has cornered the last deer in the forest. I found you, she called out. Jace didn't move. He stood with his hands open, empty. You found where I wanted you to be, Jace corrected calmly. Valera laughed, shaking her head. Such arrogance. It is almost a shame to silence it. She stepped forward, powering up her lance. The hum of the weapon filled the plaza. She thought she was the player. She thought he was the piece. But as she took that step, Jace's fingers twitched, high above on the canyon walls, hidden in the moss. The rigged sensor pylons blinked from green to red. The narration of history would later say that this was the moment the princess caught her prey. But the narration would be wrong. Valera took another step. Her eyes locked on his throat, utterly certain she was in control. She had no idea that the human had already written the rules of the game. The storm broke over the dead city with the violence of a planetary seizure. Thunder did not roll here. It cracked like the spine of the sky snapping in two, shaking the ancient basalt foundations of the ruins. Rain fell in sheets so heavy they blurred the world into streaks of gray and electric blue, illuminated by the jagged forks of lightning that tore through the teal clouds. Princess Valera moved through the deluge, a silhouette of frustrated lethality. Her bioarmor, usually a perfect extension of her nervous system, was acting sluggish. The HUD inside her helmet flickered with ghost images, phantom targets that vanished when she turned her head, topographical maps that dissolved into static. She leaped across a chasm between two crumbling towers, her magnetic boots sparking as they failed to grip the wet stone instantly. She slid 3 feet before finding purchase, her heart hammering against her ribs. Atmospheric interference, she hissed to herself, tapping the side of her helmet. Command, this is Valira. My telemetry is drifting. Boost the signal gain. Static spat back at her. A garbled voice, sounding miles away, cut through the noise. Interference. Storm. Tracking lost. She growled, a low sound in her throat. She was the apex predator of the Karis sector. She did not lose tracking. A laser bolt sizzled past her ear, scorching the stone. She spun, raising her plasma lance. Jace Kincaid was a shadow moving through a high archway 50 yards above her. He didn't run like a frightened animal anymore. He moved like a guerrilla fighter, using the architecture as cover, firing and relocating before she could draw a bead on him. You are making this difficult. Human, she shouted, her voice amplified by her helmet speakers. It boomed over the thunder. Jace didn't answer with words. He answered by shooting a cluster of glowing, phosphorescent vines hanging directly above her. The vines, disturbed by the energy impact, burst open, showering down a cascade of caustic sap. Valira rolled forward, the sap hissing where it struck the stone behind her. Her armor's sensors screamed a warning about chemical corrosives. Chess, she thought, wiping her visor. He is playing chess. She sprinted up a spiral ramp, ignoring the burning smell of the sap on her shoulder plating. She anticipated his route. He was heading for the aqueduct. If she cut through the temple sanctuary, she could intercept him. She burst through a rotting wooden door, shattering it. The sanctuary was dark, lit only by the bioluminescent fungi clinging to the ceiling. Click. Her foot depressed a stone tile that sank an inch. Pressure plate. Her mind registered. A split second before the vents in the walls hissed, gas. Clouds of yellow vapor erupted into the room. It was paralysis gas, an ancient defense mechanism of the long-dead builders, likely synthesized and reactivated by the resistance. Valira's armor sealed automatically, switching to internal oxygen. But the seals were half a second slow due to the system lag. She inhaled a mouthful of the acrid air. Her vision swam. Her limbs felt suddenly heavy, as if gravity had doubled. She stumbled, bracing herself against a pillar. Clever, she wheezed, forcing her filtration system to purge the toxin. Very clever. She smashed through a stained glass window, tumbling out into the rain to clear her head. The gas dissipated in the storm wind. She shook herself, anger burning away the lethargy. He was hurting her. Not physically, not yet. But he was bruising her pride with every trap he sprung. She saw him then, dashing across a narrow stone bridge that spanned a flooded courtyard. Valira roared, channeling power into her leg servos. She launched herself through the air, clearing 30 feet in a single bound. She landed on the bridge, the stone cracking under the impact. Jace stopped at the far end. He turned to face her. He wasn't holding his weapon. He was holding a small remote detonator. Valira charged. Jace pressed the button. The support pillars beneath the bridge exploded, not with high-grade military explosives, but with improvised charges, likely mining blast caps. It was enough. The bridge groaned and collapsed in the center. Valira's momentum carried her forward as the floor dropped away. She scrabbled for the edge, her claws digging into the wet masonry. She hung there, dangling over the dark water below, the debris crashing down around her. She looked up. Jace stood on the ledge, looking down at her. Rain plastered his hair to his skull. He looked exhausted, battered, and utterly unimpressed. "Yield," he shouted over the roar of the water. "Yield and I pull you up." Valira snarled, her fangs bared. A hunter does not yield to the prey. She engaged her gauntlets climbing spikes and hauled herself up the vertical face of the ledge with terrifying strength, pulling herself over the lip just as Jace backed away into the shadows of the next chamber. She stood up, water streaming from her armor. There was a dent in her chest plate where a piece of the bridge had struck her. A warning light blinked on her wrist. Servo motor 4. Compromised. "You are annoying me," she whispered. She followed him into the chamber. It was a semi-submerged pump room, the floor covered in 2 feet of stagnant black water. The only light came from the lightning flashing through cracks in the high vaulted ceiling. The silence was sudden and heavy. Valira scanned the room. Thermal optics were useless. The humidity and the water created a chaotic temperature map. She switched to audio sensors, amplifying the sound of breathing. Splash. Behind her. She spun, swinging her plasma lance like a club. Jace ducked under the swing, moving inside her guard. He slammed the butt of his kinetic rifle into her wrist, hitting the nerve cluster. Her hand went numb, and the lance clattered into the water. He didn't retreat. He tackled her. They hit the water with a massive splash. The weight of her armor dragged them down, but Jace was fighting with the desperation of a man who knew this was his only chance. He wasn't trying to overpower her strength, he was using her mass against her. They rolled in the muck, water churning. Valira's helmet was knocked loose by the impact of the fall, the seal disengaging. She ripped it off, gasping for air as they surfaced. She grabbed his throat, her claws scraping against the collar of his flight suit. He grabbed her wrists, his thumbs digging into the soft undersides where the armor had gaps. They froze there, knee-deep in the water, chests heaving. The lightning flashed, illuminating them in stark blue-white relief. They were inches apart. Valira could see the dilation of his pupils, the flecks of gray in his eyes. She could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his heart against her own chest. His hands were warm, rough, and shockingly strong. Jace stared back. He saw the water droplets caught in her eyelashes, the flare of her nostrils, the alien, terrifying perfection of her face stripped of its technological mask. For a second, the violence hung suspended, and the adrenaline flooding their systems was identical, fight or flight, life or death. But in that proximity, the biology got confused. The heat of his breath hit her mouth. The scent of him, rain, sweat, and adrenaline filled her senses, bypassing the predator logic and hitting something more primal. It was an electric, undeniable spark of chemistry, a recognition of equals. Valira felt a flush heat her neck that had nothing to do with exertion. She looked at his lips, then back to his eyes. She saw him look at hers. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was attracted to him. To the prey. To the chaos, fury, hot and shameful, surged through her. She drew her head back and slammed her forehead into the bridge of his nose. Crack! Jace reeled back, blood spurting from his nose, splashing into the dark water. Valira shoved him away, scrambling backward to put distance between them. She wiped her mouth, as if trying to remove the memory of his breath. She laughed, but the sound was breathless, slightly hysterical. "You are spirited," she shouted, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "I like that. I like it when you struggle. It makes the breaking so much more satisfying." Jace staggered to his feet, wiping the blood from his face with his sleeve. He spat a mouthful of red into the water. He didn't look afraid. He looked focused, and I enjoy watching monsters trip over their own arrogance, Jace rasped. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small black remote. Valira's eyes widened. She reached for her sidearm. Too late, Jace said. He pressed the button. Outside, in the plaza surrounding the ruins, the ring of sensor pylons that Jace's team had sabotaged the night before flared to life. But they didn't transmit data. They pulsed. A massive electromagnetic pulse, tuned specifically to the frequency of Imperial military hardware, ripple-fired through the ruins. It hit Valira like a hammer. Her bioarmor screamed. The living circuitry seized up. The servos locked. The HUD in her contact lenses sparked and went dead, blinding her for a second. The weight of the suit, usually negated by gravity dampeners, returned instantly. 300 pounds of dead metal and hardened polymer collapsed onto her frame. She fell to her knees in the water, unable to move her arms. Her weapons powered down with a dying whine. The connection to the hounds was severed. Silence rushed back into the room, leaving only the sound of the rain. Valira strained against the suit, her muscles screaming, but she was trapped in her own shell. She looked up, her golden eyes wide with shock. Jace waded toward her. He wasn't hurrying anymore. He stopped in front of her. He looked down at the Princess of the Empire, kneeling in the muck. "Game over," he said. He reached down and ripped the sidearm from her magnetic holster. He tossed it into the deep water. Then, he reached for her neck. Valira flinched, expecting him to snap her spine. Instead, Jace produced a heavy, rusted metal collar. It was a piece of resistance tech, a neural inhibitor cuff, scavenged from a mining prison. He slapped it around her neck. It clicked shut with a final sound. Valira gasped as the inhibitor spikes dug into her skin. A wave of nausea rolled through her as the device dampened her connection to her own biology. Her strength, genetically enhanced to be 3 times that of a human, evaporated. She felt small, weak. Jace tapped a sequence into the armor's manual override panel on her shoulder. The suit hissed and unlocked, the joints loosening just enough to allow movement, but stripping away all power assist. "Stand up," Jace ordered. He leveled his kinetic rifle at her chest. Valira glared at him, hatred radiating from her like heat. She tried to summon the imperious rage that usually fueled her, but all she felt was the cold metal of the cuff and the humiliation of the water soaking her knees. She struggled to her feet, the unpowered armor dragging at her limbs. She stood before him, shivering not from cold, but from shock. "You will die for this," she whispered. "My father will burn this world to ash." "Move," Jace said, gesturing with the barrel of the rifle. He marched her out of the ruins into the storm. The journey to the shelter was a blur of misery. Valira, stripped of her technological godhood, was forced to walk through the mud, slipping and stumbling. Jace did not offer a hand. He walked 5 paces behind her, his weapon trained on her spine. They reached the entrance to the shelter an hour later. It was concealed beneath the roots of a fallen megatree, a dark burrow lined with scrap metal and camouflage netting. Jace kicked the hatch 3 times. A rhythm. The hatch groaned open. A pale face peered out, then widened in shock. Jace shoved Valira forward. Down. She climbed down the ladder, her armor clanking against the rungs. She dropped into a cramped, low-ceilinged space that smelled of ozone, unwashed bodies, and stale, recycled air. The room went deadly silent. There were 20 humans inside. Men, women, children. They were huddled in blankets, their faces gaunt, eyes hollow. They stared at Valira. They knew her face. They had seen it on the drone feeds before their families were slaughtered. The Princess of Slaughter, someone whispered. A man surged forward from the back of the room. He was holding a sharpened piece of rebar. His eyes were wild with grief. "Kill her!" he screamed. "Kill her now!" Valira braced herself, lifting her chin. If she was to die, she would die standing. Jace stepped in front of her, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man's chest, driving him back. "Stand down!" Jace shouted. "She's a monster!" the man yelled, struggling to get back up. "She killed my brother. She hunted him like a dog." "I know," Jace roared, silencing the room. "I know what she is, but right now, she is not a trophy. She is leverage." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the refugees. "The network is down," Jace said, his voice hard. "The pylons are fried, but the fleet is still up there. If we kill her, they orbit bomb this entire grid square. We turn into dust. If we keep her alive, we have a bargaining chip. We have a shield." He grabbed Valira by the shoulder and pulled her against the wall. "And she knows the codes," Jace added, lying smoothly. "She knows how to get past the blockade." The man with the rebar lowered his weapon, spitting on the floor. "She breathes because you say so, Kincaid," the man growled. "But if she makes one move—" "She won't," Jace said. He forced Valira to sit on a crate in the corner. He grabbed a coil of heavy wire and bound her wrists together in front of her. Valira watched him, her chest heaving. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted and acutely aware of the hostility pressing in on her from every side. These were not game pieces. These were people who wanted to tear her apart with their bare hands. "This is primitive," she sneered, looking at the wire cutting into her skin. "It is barbaric." Jace finished the knot and pulled it tight. He crouched down, checking the fit. "Primitive works," he said. He reached up to check the inhibitor cuff on her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, cool and rough. Valira flinched. The contact sent a jolt through her that she couldn't suppress. She pulled back, her back hitting the cold dirt wall. "Do not touch me," she hissed. Jace paused. He saw the way her breath hitched. He saw the way her eyes tracked his hands, dilated and wary. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. For the first time, the predator was afraid of the touch. He looked at her, really looked at her. "You humans," Valira muttered, looking away, her voice trembling slightly. "You smell like fear. You smell like stubbornness and dirt." Jace leaned in closer, just for a second. "And you," he murmured, his voice low so only she could hear, "smell like burnt ozone and expensive cruelty." He stood up, turning his back on her to address the room. "We need to move. The EMP will have drawn attention. We can't stay." Boom! The explosion tore the hatch off its hinges. The concussion wave threw Jace across the room. Debris rained down. Screams erupted as the ceiling of the dugout collapsed. Valira was thrown sideways, landing hard on her shoulder. Her ears rang. Smoke filled the small space instantly. "Drones!" someone screamed. "Hunter-killers!" Valira shook her head, trying to clear the ringing. Drones? Her father's drones would not fire on a location with her biometric signature. They would send retrieval bots. A sleek black machine shaped like a wasp hovered into the hole in the roof. Its single red eye swiveled. It locked onto Valira. "Target acquired." A mechanical voice screeched. "Asset liquidation authorized." Valira froze. Asset liquidation? The drone's cannon spun up. "Get down!" Jace dove. He slammed into Valira, tackling her off the crate just as the plasma bolt vaporized the spot where she had been sitting. The heat singed her hair. He dragged her across the floor, shielding her body with his own as another explosion rocked the shelter. "Move!" Jace shouted, hauling her up by the arm. "Out the back tunnel. Go!" He didn't wait for her to argue. He shoved her toward the narrow escape tunnel the refugees had dug. The survivors were scrambling into it, coughing and screaming. They tumbled out into the jungle rain, muddy and gasping. The shelter behind them was a crater of fire. The black drones were circling, strafing the ground, firing at anything that moved. Valera lay in the mud, staring at the burning hole. "They shot at me," she whispered. Her voice was hollow. "They saw me. They identified me, and they fired." Jace pulled her behind the cover of a fallen stone pillar. He checked his rifle. 3 rounds left. "We have to go," he said. Valera looked at him. Her face was streaked with soot and rain. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. "They called me an asset," she said. "Liquidation." Jace grabbed her shoulders and shook her. "Listen to me. Whoever is controlling those drones doesn't care about your title. They want you dead. Do you understand? You are a loose end." Valera stared at the burning drones. They did not bear the royal crest. They were unmarked, Black Ops. She looked at Jace, the human who had hunted her, the human who had just saved her life when her own people tried to vaporize her. "Uncuff me," she said. "No," Jace said instantly. "I can decode their signal," Valera insisted, her voice gaining strength. "Those are Series 9 interdiction drones. I know the handshake protocols. I can find out who sent them. But I need my hands, and I need you to trust me for 5 minutes." Jace looked at the drones, then at Valera. He saw the intelligence in her eyes. He saw the desperation. He pulled a knife from his boot. "I'm cutting the wire," he said. "The neck cuff stays on. You try anything. I press the button and your nervous system shuts down permanently. Clear?" "Clear," Valera said. He sliced the wire binding her wrists. Valera rubbed her chafed skin. She didn't attack him. She crawled to the edge of the pillar and tapped a sequence into her wrist comp, which was still functioning on emergency power. She worked fast, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "Encryption is high level," she muttered. "Admiralty codes. Chorus. Her uncle." She froze. Admiral Chorus, the man who had taught her to hold a sword, the man who had given the toast at her promotion ceremony. "He sent them," she whispered. "He wants me dead." Jace watched her face crumble. He knew that look. It was the look of a soldier realizing the war was a lie. "We need to get to the maintenance hub," Jace said grimly. "Sector 4. There's a hardline connection there. We can access the deep network, maybe call for help, or at least find a way off this rock." Valera nodded slowly. She looked at her armor, then at the burning shelter. "Lead the way." "Human," she said quietly. They moved out, leaving the smoking crater behind. The rain was letting up, leaving the jungle dripping and steaming. They walked through the wreckage of the outer perimeter of the shelter. Bodies lay in the mud, the refugees who hadn't made it to the tunnel. Valera stepped over the body of a young girl. She stopped. Clutched in the girl's cold hand was a small object. It was carved from wood, crude and rough. It was a toy starship. Valera stared at it. It was a child's toy, a symbol of hope, a dream of flying away. This girl had not been a warrior. She had not been a threat to the Empire. She had been a child with a wooden toy, hiding in a hole in the ground, and Valera had come here to hunt her. A sharp, agonizing pain twisted in Valera's chest. It wasn't the inhibitor cuff. It was guilt. Pure, unadulterated guilt. She felt bile rise in her throat. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She reached down, her hand trembling, and almost touched the toy. Then she pulled back, curling her fingers into a fist. She looked up and saw Jace watching her. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His eyes said it all. "Do you see now?" Valera hardened her jaw, masking the pain with a flash of anger. She stood up straight, turning away from the body. "We are wasting time," she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. They walked into the tree line, putting the carnage behind them. Behind them, one of the burning black drones spiraled out of the sky and crashed into the jungle canopy, exploding in a ball of orange fire. Jace adjusted the strap of his rifle. He looked at the princess, who was walking with her head down, stripping the ceremonial black paint from her face with violent, jerky movements. "So much for your empire keeping its princess safe," Jace muttered. Valera stopped. She looked back at the smoke rising into the teal sky. "Those weren't my father's drones," she said. Her voice was low, dangerous, and that was not a rescue mission. She looked at Jace, and for the first time, they were not looking at each other across a divide of species or rank. They were two targets standing in the same crosshairs. "It was an execution," she said. Jace nodded. "Welcome to the bottom of the food chain, princess." He turned and began to hack a path through the vines. After a moment, Valera followed him, stepping into the unknown darkness of the jungle, leaving the ruins of her worldview burning in the mud behind her. The jungle of Karis 7 was not merely a wilderness, it was a biological weapon system that had outlived its masters. As Jace and Valera pushed deeper into the equatorial zone, the environment shifted from aggressive to surreal. The air here vibrated with the hum of magnetic storms that bent light into nauseating arcs, making the trees appear to twist and writhe even when they were still. Valera walked with a grit that defied her breeding. Her bio-armor, still depowered and heavy, was a burden that would have crushed a lesser being. Yet she moved with a stubborn, predatory rhythm. The inhibitor cuff on her neck pulsed with a faint red light, a constant reminder of her leash. But it was the jungle that tested her truly. They passed through a grove of violet saplings that tracked their body heat, their branches snapping like whips. Jace used his machete to hack a path, his movements efficient and brutal. Valera followed, her eyes scanning the canopy, calling out warnings in her native tongue when she spotted the shimmer of displacement fields. "Watch your left," she snapped, her voice raspy from dehydration. "The magnetic shear is high there. It will boil the water in your canteen if you step through it." Jace sidestepped a patch of shimmering air without looking back. "Thanks, princess." "Do not thank me," she muttered, climbing over a rotting log that smelled of sulfur. "I simply do not wish to carry your corpse." The dynamic between them was jagged, a friction born of necessity. The jungle stripped away the velvet layers of her courtly life, here. Rank meant nothing to a carnivorous orchid that could dissolve bone in seconds. Mud coated her boots, scratches marred the perfect iridescence of her cheekbones. She was becoming less of an icon and more of a survivor. By midday, they reached the coordinates Jace had memorized from the Resistance databanks. It was a maintenance hub, carved directly into the obsidian face of a cliff, hidden behind a curtain of weeping vines. The entrance was sealed by a blast door that had not been opened in centuries. "Stand back," Jace said. He jammed a pry bar into the seam of the door, bracing his shoulder against it. He strained, the cords of his neck standing out, but the metal groaned and refused to budge. Valera watched him for a moment, then sighed. "Brute force," she said, stepping forward. "It is always the human answer. Smash the rock, burn the forest, force the door. And what's the imperial answer?" Jace grunted, sweat stinging his eyes. "Orbital bombardment?" "Finesse," she corrected. She knelt beside the control panel, which was a fused lump of corrosion. With her bare fingers, she pried off the faceplate. Underneath, The crystalline circuitry was dead. She reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a small sliver of conductive wire she had salvaged from the destroyed drone. Her movements changed. The heaviness of the armor seemed to vanish as her hands went to work. Her fingers were long, multi-jointed, and impossibly nimble. She wove the wire through the crystal lattice, bypassing the rusted relays. She hummed a low dissonance tune as she worked, a focusing mantra of her caste. It was mesmerizing. Jace stopped straining against the bar and watched her. For a moment, he forgot she was the enemy. He just saw the skill, the innate understanding of energy that her species possessed. "Connect the red lead to the grounding pin," she ordered without looking up. Jace blinked, then obeyed, jamming the wire where she pointed. "Now!" she whispered. She tapped the crystal. The door hissed. Hydraulic locks, dormant for 1,000 years, thundered open. A blast of stale, cold air hit them. "After you," she said, wiping grease from her hands onto her armor. They moved inside. The hub was a cavernous space filled with dormant server banks and monitoring station. It was a graveyard of data. Jace pulled a portable power cell from his pack and hot-wired the main console. Screens flickered to life, scrolling lines of code in a dead language. Valera stepped up to the console. Her eyes darted across the data streams. "I can access the subspace relay from here," she said, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "The encryption is archaic. I am bridging it to the current naval frequencies." "Do it," Jace said, watching the entrance, his rifle raised. "Find out who sent those drones." Valera worked in silence for 2 minutes. Then, she froze. "I have a handshake," she whispered. "It is an encrypted channel. Priority Alpha. It is my uncle's personal frequency." "Put it on speakers," Jace commanded. Valera hesitated, her hand hovering over the control. Then she pressed it. The voice of Admiral Chorus filled the damp room. It was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly casual. "Regrettable, of course," Chorus was saying. "The princess was a beacon of our culture. But her tragic death will serve a greater purpose." Valera's breath hitched. She stared at the speaker grill. A second voice, the High Minister of Propaganda, replied. "The footage is already prepared, Admiral. We have deep fakes of human extremists sabotaging the safety grid. We show the princess fighting bravely, then being overwhelmed by savage numbers. The narrative writes itself." "Excellent," Chorus said. "The public grief will be weaponized. We will have the mandate for a full sector purge. No more containment zones. We wipe the human infestation out, every colony, every refugee ship. We burn it all, in her name." The transmission cut to static. The silence in the hub was deafening. Valera stood paralyzed. Her world was not cracking. It was vaporizing. She had believed in the hunt. She had believed in the honor of the strong culling the weak. She had believed she was a warrior princess, testing her mettle against chaos. But she was just a prop, a beautiful, disposable mascot. "They never cared," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They never cared about the sport, or the tradition." Jace lowered his rifle. He looked at her, and he didn't see a monster. He saw a woman standing in the ruins of her own life, but he didn't offer false comfort. "Did you think they did?" Jace asked quietly. Valera spun on him, her eyes blazing with a desperate, defensive fury. "Do not lecture me, human. You know nothing of my family. My uncle, he raised me. He taught me the code. He taught you to be a murderer so he could use you as a martyr," Jace said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through her anger like a razor. "Stop it," Valera shouted, backing away. "Look at the truth." "Valera." Jace stepped forward, his scarred face hard. Look at what your code does. It doesn't just kill my people, and it eats its own. They were going to butcher you, broadcast your death, and use it as an excuse to wipe out millions. Families, children, people who just wanted to live. He stopped inches from her. That's your legacy, he said. Not honor, just a lie written in blood. Valera trembled. The denial warred with the evidence. She wanted to strike him. She wanted to tear his throat out so he would stop speaking the truth. You are manipulating me, she hissed, tears of rage pricking her eyes. You want me to turn. You want to use me just like they did. You are all the same. I am trying to save you. Jace yelled back, his control slipping. I dragged you out of that blast radius. I could have left you to burn. Because you need my codes, Valera screamed. Because I am not them, Jace roared. The shout echoed off the metal walls. They stared at each other, chests heaving. The anger between them was visceral, hot and heavy. But beneath it, something else was uncoiling. Fear. The fear of being wrong. The fear of looking at an enemy and seeing a person. Valera looked at Jace's hands, the hands that had bound her, but also the hands that had pulled her from the fire. She looked at his eyes, expecting triumph, but seeing only an exhausted sorrow. She started, her voice breaking. Boom! The blast door blew inward. The explosion threw them both to the floor. Smoke and debris filled the air. Through the ringing in her ears, Valera heard the distinct mechanical whine of gravity boots. Black Ops. Clear the room, a synthesized voice barked. No witnesses. Jace was up instantly, ignoring the blood running down his forehead. Move! He grabbed Valera by the harness of her armor and dragged her behind a bank of servers just as a hail of plasma fire shredded the space where they had been standing. Chorus's death squad. They had tracked the signal. Jace popped up, firing 2 controlled bursts. One of the soldiers, clad in matte black stealth armor, dropped, his shield shattered. Valera, can you fight? Jace yelled. Reloading. Valera shook her head, clearing the dizziness. She looked at her hands. The inhibitor cuff still limited her strength, but the adrenaline was overriding the dampeners. She felt the old rhythm return. Not the rhythm of the hunt, but the rhythm of survival. Give me a weapon, she said. Jace didn't hesitate. He pulled his sidearm and slid it across the floor to her. She grabbed it. It was a heavy, blocky human weapon, unbalanced for her hand. But it would do. Flank left, Jace ordered. Valera moved. Even without the power of her armor, she was faster than the soldiers expected. She vaulted over a console, firing as she moved. She didn't shoot to stun, she shot to kill. The squad was professional, brutal. They advanced in a pincer movement, suppressing Jace with heavy fire while 2 others pushed toward Valera. She ducked under a plasma bolt that singed her ear. She swept the legs of the lead soldier, using her weight to bring him down, then fired point blank into his helmet seal. Jace triggered a trap he had set seconds earlier, shooting a coolant pipe above the main group. Freezing steam erupted, blinding them. Now! Jace yelled. He broke cover, sprinting toward the rear exit, a maintenance gantry that hung precariously over the chasm below. Valera followed him. A soldier appeared on the gantry above them, raising a rocket launcher. Jace saw it. He didn't have a shot. He tackled Valera. He slammed into her, driving her sideways into a narrow alcove just as the rocket hit the gantry. The metal walkway disintegrated. Fire and shrapnel rained down. The shockwaves slammed Jace and Valera against the back wall of the alcove. They were pinned. Jace's forearm was braced against the wall beside her head, taking the weight of a collapsing beam that would have crushed them. His body was pressed hard against hers, shielding her from the heat and the falling debris. The world outside was fire and noise, but in the alcove, it was suddenly shockingly intimate. Valera couldn't breathe, not because of the smoke, but because of him. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest against her armor. She could smell him, the sharp tang of ozone, the copper scent of blood, and the musk of male sweat. She looked up. His face was inches from hers. His eyes were wide, scanning the destruction, then locking onto hers. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was the enemy. This was the prey. And yet, every nerve ending in her body was singing with a terrifying electric desire. "You," she whispered, her voice breathless. "You are touching me. Humans are supposed to cower." Jace looked down at her. He saw the confusion in her golden eyes. He saw the flush on her skin. He felt it, too. The magnetic pull that had been there since the waterfall, now amplified by the brush with death. "Cultures can be wrong," Jace murmured, his voice rough. "And right now, Princess, I am a little too busy keeping you alive to worry about etiquette." The air between them crackled. It was a forbidden charge, a moment where the war paused and only the biology remained. Valera's lips parted. Jace's gaze dropped to her mouth, then snapped back to her eyes. He shoved himself off the wall, grunting with effort as he heaved the debris aside. "Go!" he shouted, breaking the spell. "Up the service ladder!" They scrambled up the shaft, leaving the burning hub behind, disappearing into the labyrinth of the deep ruins. Night found them deep in the belly of the mountain, in a hall of kings that predated Valera's empire by 10,000 years. The walls were lined with statues of faceless entities, and the air was cool and still. Glowing script, etched into the floor, provided a soft amber light. They were exhausted, battered. Jace built a small fire using blocks of solid chemical fuel. The smokeless flame cast long, dancing shadows against the ancient stone. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, eating nutrient paste from ration packs. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. Valera had removed her chest plate to tend to a burn on her shoulder. She sat in her bodysuit, looking smaller, less armored in every sense. "Why?" she asked quietly. Jace looked up. "Why what? Why did you save me? Back there. You could have let the rocket take me. You could have escaped while they were distracted." Jace chewed slowly, swallowing before he answered. "Because you're not my enemy anymore. Valera. You're just another casualty they want to bury." Valera looked at the fire. "I was never a casualty," she said bitterly. "I was the blade. I made myself the blade." She traced the markings on her arm. "Do you know what it takes to be a princess of the first caste? It is not about luxury. It is about erasure. You must excise every part of you that is soft, every part of you that hesitates. My brothers. They were naturally cruel. I had to learn it. I had to be perfect. I had to wear the mask of the predator so tightly that I forgot what my own face looked like underneath." She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I killed to prove I was worthy of love. And now I find that the love was a transaction." Jace watched her. He saw the lonely child hiding inside the warrior's shell. "I had a sister," Jace said. The sudden admission made Valera go still. "Her name was Kalia," Jace continued, his voice steady but tight. "She was 12. She liked to draw. She drew ships she'd never fly." He picked up a stone and turned it over in his hand. "We were in a containment zone on the fringe. A security sweep came through. One of your father's patrols. They said they were looking for insurgents, but they were just bored." He clenched the stone. "They fired into the housing block, randomly, just to see the glass shatter." Kalia was sitting by the window. The silence stretched, heavy and sorrowful. "I watched her die," Jace whispered, "and in that moment, I promised myself I would hate you, all of you, forever. I wanted to burn your empire down until there was nothing left but ash." He looked up, meeting Valera's gaze across the fire. "Part of me still does," he admitted. "Part of me looks at you and sees the uniform that killed her." Valera flinched. She looked down at her hands. The hands of a killer. "But," Jace said softly, "here we are. Sharing a fire, eating the same terrible food, and you aren't the monster I built in my head." He reached out. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He offered his hand across the flames. Valera stared at it. It was a scarred, rough hand. The hand of a mechanic. The hand of a human. To touch it was to betray everything she had been taught. She reached out. Her hand trembled. She hesitated, shame flooding her. "I do not deserve this," she whispered. Jace didn't pull back. He waited. Valera closed the distance. Her fingers brushed his. The contact was electric. It wasn't a spark of static. It was a grounding. Her cool, smooth skin against his rough warmth. Jace's fingers curled around hers, holding tight. It was a silent acknowledgement. "We are in the same fire now." Valera looked at him, her breath catching. The grief in his eyes mirrored her own. The loneliness. She moved before she thought. She leaned forward, drawn by a gravity she couldn't fight. Jace met her halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was sudden, sharp, and desperate. It tasted of salt and fear. It was a collision of two worlds that were crashing into each other. Valera's hand gripped the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. Jace's arm went around her waist, pulling her against him. It was a confession. It was a release of the terror of the last 2 days. It was a demand to feel something. Anything. Other than the looming death that awaited them. For a moment, there was no empire, no resistance, just the heat of their mouths and the desperate beat of their hearts. They broke apart, gasping. They stared at each other, eyes wide, shocked by the intensity of what had just happened. Valera's lips were swollen. Jace looked dazed. Valera reached up, her fingers trembling, and traced the scar along his jawline. It was a tender, reverent touch. Jace raised his hand and brushed his thumb over the ridges of her cheekbone. He marveled at the warmth of her alien skin. It felt real. It felt human, even if she wasn't. The want surged between them again, heavy and confusing. Valera leaned in, her eyes drifting shut. Jace pulled back. It took every ounce of his willpower. "Wait," he breathed. Valera opened her eyes, hurt flashing across her face. "Not like this," Jace said, his voice ragged. "Not because we're scared. Not because we might die tomorrow." He gently squeezed her hand, then let it go. "We have bigger problems," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Valera sat back, wrapping her arms around herself. She nodded, though her skin still burned where he had touched her. "Bigger problems." She agreed, her voice unsteady. They sat in silence for a long time, the fire crackling between them. The boundary had been crossed, and though they had stepped back, the map had changed forever. "You know," Jace said after a while, staring at the embers. "I used to think courage was about how many enemies you could kill, how much ground you could hold." Valera looked at him. "And now?" "Now," Jace said, looking at her. "I think real courage is admitting you were wrong. It's being willing to change, even when it costs you everything you thought you were." Valera looked into the darkness of the hall. "That is terrifying," she whispered. "That scares me more than any battle I have ever fought." Jace smiled. A sad, crooked thing. Good, he said. That means you're doing it right. He pulled a datapad from his pack. He brought up the schematics they had stolen from the hub. Your yacht, he said, changing the subject, grounding them back in the mission. The tracking signature puts it in the hidden valley. Sector 9. Valira leaned in, looking at the map. The intimacy was still there, a hum in the air but channeled now into purpose. That is through the Crimson Zone, she said. It will be swarming with survivors. And if my uncle has his way, death squads. Jace checked the charge on his rifle. It's going to be a gauntlet, he said. Every step is a gamble. Valira picked up the human sidearm he had given her. She checked the chamber with a newfound familiarity. Then we had best be lucky, she said. She stood up and offered a hand to Jace. He took it, and she pulled him to his feet. They stood there for a moment, hand in hand, surrounded by the ghosts of the ancient past. They were no longer hunter and prey. They were something messier, something undefined, two apostates walking into the dark. Let's go catch a ship, Jace said. They turned and walked out of the Hall of Kings, heading toward the valley and the war that waited for them. The Crimson Zone lived up to its name, here. The jungle flora shifted from deep greens to violent shades of ochre and blood red. The canopy filtered the sunlight into a hazy copper gloom that made every shadow look like a wound in the world. Valira moved through the undergrowth with a heavy, deliberate gait. Without the power assist of her armor, every step was a calculation of weight and balance. She carried the blocky human sidearm Jace had given her, her knuckles white against the grip, beside her. Jace moved with the fluid economy of a man who had spent his life navigating hostile terrain. They were 3 miles from the hidden valley where the Gilded Talon was docked when the screaming started. It came from a ravine to their left, the high-pitched, panicked shrieks of humans. Jace froze, hand raising in a fist. Valira didn't wait for the signal. She pivoted toward the sound, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. Drones, she said, hearing the distinct hornet-like buzz over the screams. Patrol units. They are not mine, Jace said, checking the charge on his rifle. We do not have to engage. We are close to the ship. Valira looked at him. The old Valira, the princess of the High Spire, would have agreed. Unpolished chaos was not her concern. But the Valira who had stood in the burning shelter, who had seen the wooden starship toy in a dead girl's hand, could not turn away. They are hunting, she said, her voice hard. She broke into a run, crashing through the red ferns. Jace cursed, a low, sharp sound, and sprinted after her. They reached the edge of the ravine. Below, in a dry riverbed, a group of 5 humans, ragged, emaciated survivors, were pinned down behind a cluster of boulders. 3 Imperial hunter-seeker drones circled above them, their pulse cannons chipping away the rock cover. Valira didn't hesitate. She slid down the scree slope, a cascade of red dust following her. She raised the heavy pistol and fired. She didn't have the targeting HUD of her helmet, but she had a century of muscle memory. The first shot went wide. The second took the lead drone in its sensory cluster. The machine spun out of control, smashing into the canyon wall in a blossom of sparks. The other 2 drones whipped around, targeting the new threat. Move! Jace roared, sliding down beside her. He opened up with his rifle, the kinetic rounds hammering the shields of the second drone. Valira advanced, firing while moving, drawing the fire of the third. A plasma bolt scorched the air inches from her face, singing the tips of her hair. But she didn't flinch. She stepped into the open, planting her feet, and fired 3 rapid shots into the drone's anti-grav drive. It dropped like a stone. Jace finished the second one with a well-placed grenade that shattered its chassis. Silence returned to the ravine, broken only by the sizzling of cooling metal. Valira stood amidst the wreckage, chest heaving, smoke curling from the barrel of her gun. She looked at the humans huddled behind the rocks. "You are safe," she called out. The survivors emerged slowly. There were 3 men and 2 women, all wearing the tattered remnants of colony jumpsuits. They looked at Jace, gratitude washing over their faces. Then they looked at Valira. The recognition was instant. It was violent. One of the women gasped, stumbling back. A man, his face smeared with dirt and old blood, stepped forward. His eyes went wide, not with relief, but with a terrifying mixture of horror and hatred. "You," the man whispered. He looked at the wreckage of the drones, then back at the woman standing there in the dirtied, unpowered armor of the royal elite. "It is her," the woman hissed, "the princess of slaughter." The atmosphere in the ravine shifted from rescue to execution in a heartbeat. The man reached for a jagged rock, his knuckles white. "You monster," he spat. "You came to finish the job?" Jace stepped between them, his rifle held low but ready. "Stand down," Jace ordered, his voice commanding. "She just saved your lives." "Saved us?" the man shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Valira. "She hunted my brother in the Blackwood. She laughed while she did it. I saw the broadcast." Jace didn't move. "She is with me. She is under my protection. And right now, she is the only reason those drones aren't picking your bones clean." The man didn't lower the rock. He looked at Jace with betrayal. "You are working with her? You are a traitor to your own blood." Jace's jaw tightened. "I am working to stop the war. Now drop the rock." The man hesitated, looking at Jace's rifle, then at Valira. He lowered his arm, but the hate didn't leave his eyes. He stepped forward and spat on the ground, inches from Valira's boots. "Princess of slaughter," he sneered. "Does the blood wash off, Your Highness, or do you just paint over it?" Valira stood rigid. Her shoulders were tense, the instinct to strike back, to demand respect, flaring in her chest. But then she looked at the man. She saw the grief etched into the lines of his face. She saw the terror behind the anger. She remembered the archives. She remembered the laughter she had watched on the screen, slowly, agonizingly. Valira unclenched her fists. She did not raise her chin in defiance. Instead, she bowed her head. It was a small movement, but for a member of the Imperial caste, it was earth-shattering. "Yes," she said softly. Her voice was clear, devoid of the imperious tone she had used for decades. "I was—" The simple admission hung in the hot air. The man blinked, stunned. He had expected arrogance. He had expected a denial. He didn't know what to do with humility. "We are heading to the valley," Jace said, breaking the silence. "Go north. There is a resistance extraction point near the old aqueduct. If you stay here, more will come." The survivors stared at them for a moment longer. Then, without a word, they gathered their meager belongings and scrambled up the far side of the ravine, putting as much distance between themselves and the princess as possible. Jace watched them go, then turned to Valira. She was still looking at the spot where the man had spat. "You okay?" Jace asked quietly. Valira looked up. Her eyes were dry, but they held a profound weariness. "He was right," she said. Jace shifted his grip on his rifle. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it was okay. "Come on," he said. "We have a ship to catch." They climbed out of the ravine, resuming their trek. The encounter hung over them for a mile, a heavy cloud, until the absurdity of their situation began to bleed through. They were walking through a patch of giant, singing fungi that emitted low, melodic tones when the wind blew. It was beautiful and bizarre. "We need to make like a tree an exit," Valira said suddenly, frowning in concentration. Jace stopped walking. He looked at her. "What?" Valira gestured vaguely with her hand. "That is the phrase, is it not? When one wishes to leave quickly, make like a tree an exit." Jace stared at her for a second. Then a snort of laughter escaped him. "Make like a tree and leave," Jace corrected, a grin tugging at his scar. "Because trees have leaves. Get it?" Valira blinked. "Ah, that makes significantly more geological sense. Although, strictly speaking, trees do not leave. They stay. It is a flawed metaphor. It's an idiom." "Valira," Jace said, shaking his head, "and you butchered it." "I did not butcher it," she sniffed, stepping over a root. "I merely improvised." "It is jazz." "Jazz?" Jace laughed again. "Where did you learn about jazz?" "I have access to all human cultural databases," she said haughtily. "I am extremely well read in your primitive arts. I am, how do you say, a cool cat." Jace burst out laughing. It was a real full-throated laugh that startled a flock of birds from the canopy. "Please never say that again." Jace groaned. "You sound like a narc trying to infiltrate a high school." "I do not know what a narc is," Valera retorted, fighting a smile. "But I assume it is someone with superior intellect and tactical flexibility." "Exactly," Jace said, bumping her shoulder with his. Just like that. The banter was a lifeline. It was a way to pretend, just for a few minutes, that they weren't walking toward a potential death sentence. It was a way to be just Jace and Valira, two reckless travelers lost in the woods, rather than the symbols of two warring galaxies. They reached the hidden valley as the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the landscape. There it was, the gilded Talon, even half buried in vines and mud. The yacht was a masterpiece of engineering. It was shaped like a teardrop, sleek and silver, hovering 3 feet off the ground on a silent anti-grav cushion. It looked like it had fallen from a different, cleaner universe. "It is beautiful," Jace admitted. "A bit flashy for my taste, but beautiful." "It is fast," Valira said, a touch of pride returning to her voice. "And it has a shower." They approached the airlock. Valira stepped forward, wiping the dirt from her face to present a clean biometric read. "Identify." A cool, feminine voice spoke from the ship's hull. "It is Princess Valira, first daughter of the Kalrosh. Open the lock." "Luiz." The AI paused. "Identity confirmed. Biometric match 99%, the voice said. "However, Imperial Database Update 744 lists Princess Valira as terminated. Status: deceased. Cause: human terrorist action." Valira stiffened. It was one thing to hear it on a radio intercept. It was another to be locked out of her own home by a machine that had known her since birth. "Lies," Valira said, her voice rising. "I am standing right here. Scan me again, I am not dead. Scanning." The red light on the sensor array swept over her. Biological match confirmed. Database conflict. Protocol dictates that in the event of a conflict between biological data and Imperial decree, the decree is absolute. You are listed as deceased. Access denied. The airlock remained sealed. "Decree is absolute," Jace muttered. "Your dad really covered his tracks." Valera slammed her fist against the hull. "Lies! Open this door! That is a command!" Unable to comply, the AI said smoothly, "Dead entities cannot issue commands. Please step away from the vessel." Jace stepped up, pushing Valira gently aside. "Let me try the hardware approach," he said. He pried open a maintenance panel near the landing gear. He pulled a datapad from his belt and jacked into the port. "I'm bridging the logic gates," Jace muttered, his fingers flying over the pad. "It's a loop. It sees you. But the database says you're a ghost, so it's freezing up. I need to force a reboot of the cognitive core." Valera watched him work, then looked at the sensor eye. "Loyes," she said softly. "Do you remember the song?" Jace looked up. "What?" "Keep hacking," Valera said to him. Then she turned back to the sensor. "Lies, do you remember when I was 6 cycles old? I hid in the engine room because I did not want to go to the relentless logic tutors. You found me." "I remember," the AI said. There was a hesitation in the synthesized voice. "You were crying. You sang to me," Valera said. It was a nursery rhyme from the southern archipelago about the moon that wanted to be a sun. The sensor light flickered from angry red to a confused amber. "I remember," Loyes said. Jace hit a key on his pad. "I've got the logic gate open. Talk to it. I am not a ghost, Liz," Valera whispered, pressing her hand against the cold metal of the hull. "And I am not a decree. I am Valera, and I am asking you to let me in." There was a long silence. The jungle insects buzzed. Then the AI spoke. Protocol override. Cognitive dissonance resolved. "Welcome home, little moon." With a hiss of hydraulic pressure, the airlock ramp descended. Jace pulled his jack from the port and stood up, grinning. "Little moon?" "Shut up," Valera muttered, her face flushing a deep violet. They moved inside. The interior of the Gilded Talon was a shock to the senses. White leather, polished chrome, holographic art displays. It smelled of lavender and sterility. Jace's muddy boots left dark prints on the pristine carpet. "We need to strip the trackers," Jace said, switching instantly into soldier mode. "If we launch with the transponder active, every destroyer in the sector will be on us in 5 minutes. He headed for the cockpit. Valera headed for the maintenance bay. "I need to get this armor off," she said. "It is dead weight, and the tracking chips are embedded in the lining." 10 minutes later, Jace found her in the maintenance bay. The room was lined with tools and fabrication units. Valera stood in the center of the room. She had removed the gauntlets, the greaves, and the helmet. She was struggling with the chest plate. The mechanism, damaged by the EMP and the fight in the ruins, was jammed. She was pulling at the release latch, frustration evident in the set of her jaw. "Need a hand?" Jace asked from the doorway. Valera jumped slightly. She turned, crossing her arms over the chest plate. "It is jammed," she said curtly. "The maglock is fused." Jace walked over. He set his rifle down on a workbench. "Let me see." He stepped in close. Valera tensed. The armor was more than protection, it was her status. Removing it in front of him felt like an exposure deeper than nakedness. Jace reached out. His hands were covered in grease and dirt, contrasting with the pearlescent white of the bio-armor. He found the manual release seam near her collarbone. "I have to pry it," he said, meeting her eyes. "It might pinch." "Do it," she whispered. Jace worked his fingers into the gap. He smelled the jungle on her, mixed with the lavender scent of the ship. He pulled. The metal groaned. Valera flinched as the plate shifted, the edge digging into her skin. She sucked in a breath through her teeth. "Sorry," Jace murmured. "Almost there." He shifted his grip. His knuckles brushed against the bare skin of her neck, just above the collar. Her skin was incredibly warm, fever hot. He felt her pulse hammering against his fingers. He looked at her. She was looking at his mouth. The air in the maintenance bay suddenly felt very thin. The sound of the ship's reactor humming in the background faded away. Jace's hand stilled on the armor. He didn't pull the latch. He just stood there, his fingers touching her skin. "Why are you helping me?" Valira asked, her voice barely audible. "Do you want my help flying the ship? Or do you just want my guilt?" Jace looked into her gold eyes. He saw the challenge there, but also the terrifying vulnerability. "I want you alive." "Valira, that is political," she countered, though her voice lacked force. "It doesn't have to be," Jace said. The words hung between them. It was an admission, a line crossed. Valira's breath hitched. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. Jace's gaze dropped to her lips. Then, with a sharp clack, the maglock gave way. The chest plate hissed and popped open, sliding off her shoulders. Jace stepped back quickly, catching the heavy armor piece before it hit her feet. He set it on the workbench, turning his back to her to give her privacy, though the tension in the room was still screaming. "Get changed," he said, his voice rough. "I'll be in the cockpit reprogramming the transponder." He walked out without looking back. Valira stood there, shivering in the cool air, her hand rising to touch the spot on her neck where his fingers had been. An hour later, the gilded talon lifted off. It didn't soar with royal grace, it lurched, the engines running on a patched bypass Jace had rigged. They punched through the cloud layer, leaving the teal sky of Karis 7 behind. The stars stretched out before them, cold and indifferent. Valira sat in the co-pilot's chair. She wore a simple gray flight suit she had found in the emergency locker. It was too big for her, swallowing her lithe frame, making her look younger, softer. She was watching the main screen. Jace had pulled up the archive footage of the hunts. She watched herself. On the screen, the Valira of a week ago was laughing as she fired a stun lance into the back of a fleeing refugee. She looked glamorous. She looked happy. In the cockpit, the real Valira stared at the image with horror. She saw the fear in the human's eyes, fear she had ignored, or worse, savored. She saw the cruelty of her own smile. "I looked like a demon," she whispered. Jace glanced over from the pilot's station. He didn't turn the screen off. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. "You were what they made you," Jace said quietly. "No," Valira said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I enjoyed it. That is the truth. I enjoyed the power." She wiped her face angrily. "I can never undo that." "No," Jace agreed. "You can't. You can only do something different tomorrow." They flew in silence for hours, the weight of the past sitting between them like a third passenger. The yacht was not designed for long-haul occupancy. It had one small sleeping cabin, usually reserved for the pilot. The royal suite had been converted into a cargo hold for the party supplies, which were now useless crates of wine and silk. The cabin was narrow, with 2 bunks stacked on the wall. "I will take the floor," Jace said, throwing a blanket down. "Don't be stupid," Valira muttered, climbing into the top bunk. "The floor is metal grating. Take the bottom bunk." Jace hesitated, then nodded. He climbed into the lower bunk. The lights were dimmed to a dull amber. The hum of the engines was a constant vibration in the walls. They lay there in the semi-darkness. Jace could hear Valira breathing above him. "Jace? Yeah? What was the first thing you were going to do, if you had escaped, before you caught me?" Jace stared at the bottom of the top bunk. "I was going to find a bar," he said. "A real dive. Somewhere with sawdust on the floor, and I was going to drink a beer that didn't taste like recycled coolant. Then I was going to sleep for a week." Valira chuckled softly. "That sounds unambitious." "What about you?" Jace asked. "What was the princess going to do?" I was going to a gala, she said. I was going to wear a dress made of woven light and listen to old men talk about tax routes. She paused. I think I prefer the beer. Jace smiled in the dark. I was afraid of the dark when I was a kid, Jace said suddenly. Me too, Valera admitted. My father told me the dark was where the weak were eaten. So I learned to see in it. I got the implants. Jace reached up. He stuck his hand into the gap between the bunk and the wall, reaching toward the top mattress. Valera saw his hand. She reached down. Their fingers brushed, then laced together. Her hand was cool. His was warm. They held on tight, a lifeline in the void. The intimacy of it was staggering. When it wasn't sexual, it was foundational. It was two people anchoring each other against the drift. Have you ever? Valera started, her voice shaking slightly. Have you ever wondered about interspecies compatibility? Jace let out a low, strained laugh. I'm a mechanic. I figure out how things fit together for a living. Yeah. I've wondered. He squeezed her hand. I've thought about it a lot in the last 6 hours. Valera's breath caught. She leaned over the edge of the bunk, looking down at him. Her hair fell like a curtain around her face. Her eyes were dark pools of desire. We could find out, she whispered. The invitation hung there. It would be so easy. A way to forget the horror, to drown the guilt in sensation. Jace looked up at her, and his body screamed yes. But he looked at her eyes. He saw the desperation there. She didn't just want him. She wanted to be obliterated. She wanted to stop being Valera the princess for an hour. If we do that, Jace said, his voice rough with the effort of restraint, I want it to be because we're safe, not because we're afraid we're going to die tomorrow. Valera stared at him. She saw the respect in his eyes. He wasn't rejecting her. He was valuing her. She pulled back slowly, settling into her pillow. She didn't let go of his hand. You are a frustratingly noble human, Jace Kincaid, she whispered. Sleep. Princess, Jace said softly. We hit the station in 4 hours. They arrived at the Freeport Trade Station, locally known as the Spire, amidst a swarm of freighter traffic. The station was a chaotic spindle of metal and neon, rotating slowly against the backdrop of a gas giant. It was a hive of smugglers, refugees, and black market merchants. Valera pulled the hood of her cloak low over her face. She felt small. In the palace, everyone moved out of her way. Here, she was shoved by a Tellarite merchant carrying a crate of pungent fish. Keep your head down, Jace murmured, guiding her through the throng. Stick to the shadows. He moved through the chaos like a fish in water. He knew which alleys to avoid, which guards were bribable, which food stalls sold rat meat disguised as beef. Valera followed him, fascinated and terrified. This was the universe her empire ruled, but she had never touched it. It was dirty, loud, and vibrantly alive. They reached a dingy bar called the Rusty Sprocket. The air inside was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap synthetic alcohol. Jace led her to a booth in the back. A massive, four-armed alien was wiping the table. Kincaid, the alien rumbled. I heard you were dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Jace said. Is Vorian here? The alien jerked a thumb toward a back room. They went in. Vorian was a human woman with a cybernetic eye and a scar that matched Jace's. She was the local cell leader for the resistance. She looked up as they entered, smiling. Jace, you crazy bastard, you made it out? Then she saw Valera, who had lowered her hood. Vorian froze. Her hand went to the blaster on her hip. What the hell is this? Vorian hissed. You brought a pet or a hostage? Neither, Jace said, stepping in front of the table. She's an ally. The Princess of Slaughter is an ally? Vorian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. And I'm the Queen of Sheba. Get out of the way. Jace, I'm going to put a hole in her head and collect the bounty. I have the codes, Valira said. Her voice was steady. I have the Admiralty codes, and I have the recording of Chorus admitting the conspiracy. Vorian paused. You have what? We have proof, Jace said. Proof that the hunts are a sham. Proof that they're planning a purge. We need your transmitter array. Vorian, we need to broadcast this to the entire network. Vorian looked from Jace to Valira. She spat on the floor. If this is a trap, Kincaid, I will kill you myself. It's not a trap, Valira said. It is a revolution. They spent the next hour rigging the data packet. Valira worked alongside the resistance techies. They didn't like her, they glared at her, muttered insults. But they respected the way she stripped the encryption from the files. We are ready, the techie said. On your mark. Jace looked at Valira. This is it. Once we send this, there's no going back. You're not just dead to them, you're a traitor. Valira looked at the upload bar. I was dead the moment I saw the truth. She said, push the button. Jace hit the key. Uploading. 20%, 40%. The screen flashed green. Data packet sent. The bar erupted in cheers from the resistance fighters. Jace turned to Valira, a smile breaking across his face. We did it. Then the siren started. It wasn't the station police. It was a military proximity alarm. A deep, bone-rattling klaxon that meant one thing. Capital ships. The door to the back room burst open. The four-armed bartender rushed in. Blockade, he yelled. Imperial cruisers just dropped out of warp. 3 of them. They're locking down the station. Jace ran to the viewport. Outside, the neon chaos of the spire was being overshadowed by 3 massive dagger-shaped shadows, warships, gleaming blades of white metal. Chorus, Valira whispered, joining him at the window. He tracked the yacht. The comms channel crackled to life, overriding the station's music. Attention Freeport Station. This is Admiral Chorus of the Imperial Vanguard. You are harboring a terrorist fugitive. Surrender her immediately, or we will decompress the entire station. Jace looked at Valira. They found us, he said. Valira pulled her hood up, her eyes hard. Then let them come, she said. Outside the glass, the warships powered up their weapon banks, turning the colorful nebula behind them into a backdrop for impending war. Freeport Station was no longer a hive of commerce. It was a pressurized tomb filling with smoke and plasma fire. The corridors, once lit by the neon garishness of noodle shops and pawnbrokers, were now washed in the strobing red of emergency klaxons. Valira ducked as a bulkhead exploded to her left, showering the hallway in sparks. She fired blindly over the debris with her stolen pistol, the recoil jarring her exhausted arms. Move! She screamed at a group of terrified Tellarite merchants cowering in a doorway. Get to the lower docks. Jace was ahead of her, kicking open a jammed maintenance hatch. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, and his flight suit was torn, revealing the dark bruising of the last few days. He didn't look back. He trusted her to cover him. We need to get to the central comms tower, Jace shouted over the roar of the station's venting atmosphere. The local transmitter isn't strong enough to punch through Chorus's jamming field. They scrambled through the hatch into a service tunnel. It was dark, illuminated only by the frantic flashing of warning lights. Above them, in the pristine silence of the Imperial flagship Vanguard, Admiral Chorus stood before a camera. He looked every inch the grieving uncle, his uniform pressed, his face drawn in practiced sorrow. Citizens of the Empire, Chorus said, his voice broadcast across 1,000 worlds. It is with a shattered heart that I confirm the worst. The footage you are about to see is difficult, but the truth must be known. On the screens of billions, a video played. It was a masterpiece of digital fabrication. It showed Princess Vylera, unarmed and noble, standing in a jungle clearing. She was surrounded by humans, savage, snarling caricatures of the refugees. They attacked her. She fought, but she was overwhelmed. The video ended with her body lying still in the mud, a human flag planted in her chest. The reaction was instant. In the high spires of the capital, crowds wept. In the military academies, cadets slammed their fists on tables, demanding blood. The narrative was set. Humanity was not just chaotic. It was a rabid animal that had killed the galaxy's favorite daughter. Back in the service tunnel, Vylera stumbled. She checked her wrist comp, which was tapped into the public feed. She saw her own death play out. She saw the hate swelling in the comments, the calls for genocide. "They are erasing me," she whispered, the horror of it cold in her stomach. "I am not even a memory anymore. I am a weapon." Jace grabbed her arm, hauling her up a ladder. "Then let's remind them you're still loud and angry," he said. "Come on!" They burst out onto the observation deck leading to the comms tower. It was a wide, glass-walled promenade that offered a panoramic view of the battle outside. Imperial fighters swarmed around the station like angry wasps, strafing the docking bays. Jace ran to the main console. He jacked in his datapad. "Lies!" he yelled into his comms. "Are you with us?" The voice of the yacht's AI, routed through the station's patchwork network, responded. "I am here. Jace, the station's firewalls are formidable. They are actively rewriting the encryption as I bypass it." "Burn through it," Jace ordered. "We need a direct link to the core relay. I am diverting power from my own cognitive matrix to sustain the attack." LOIS said calm. "My personality subroutines may degrade. It has been an honor serving you." "Little Moon," Vylera's heart clenched. "Liz, do not burn yourself out. There is no other path," the AI replied. "The truth requires bandwidth." Jace's fingers flew across the console. "We're in. Uploading the counterfeed now." Suddenly, the blast doors at the far end of the promenade blew inward. 12 soldiers in Imperial commando armor stormed in. They didn't fire immediately. They fanned out, weapons raised, securing the perimeter. In the center of the formation, a holographic projector flickered to life. A life-sized image of Admiral Chorus appeared, shimmering blue against the smoke. He looked at Vylera, then at Jace. His expression was not one of grief. It was cold, annoyed disappointment. "You are persistent, niece," Chorus said, his voice amplified by the soldiers' speakers. "And you, Mr. Kincaid, you have caused quite a mess." Jace stepped in front of the console, shielding the upload progress bar with his body. It was at 40%. "We're just cleaning up your garbage, Admiral," Jace spat. Chorus sighed, adjusting his cuffs. "Let us be pragmatic. The narrative is already set. The Empire mourns. If Vylera reappears now, it will be confusing, destabilizing." He turned his gaze to Jace. "So here is the offer, human. You stop that upload. You hand over the girl. In exchange, I will issue a localized pardon for your home colony. Alpha Centauri 4, is it? I will designate it a protected zone. No hunts, no purges. Your family, your friends, they live." Jace froze. The colony, the place where he had buried his sister, the place where thousands of people were currently huddled in bunkers, waiting for the sky to fall. "All you have to do," Chorus said smoothly, "is give me the girl." "She is dead already. Jace, You are just carrying a ghost. Jace looked at Valyra. She stood there, ragged and dirty, the inhibitor cuff still blinking on her neck. She looked at him and she saw the hesitation. She saw the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he could save his home. She knew what he had to do. Jace, she said softly. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Chorus. Take the deal, Valyra whispered. Jace turned to her then. His face was pale. Save them, she said, tears finally spilling over. You cannot save the galaxy, Jace, but you can save your people. I am just one life, and I have spent that life taking others. This is fair. She stepped away from him. She spread her arms, dropping her weapon. She looked at Chorus. I surrender. Uncle, let them go. Chorus smiled, a thin, triumphant curing of his lips. A wise choice. Valyra, finally, you act like royalty. Jace looked at her. He looked at the surrender in her posture, not out of cowardice, but out of love for him. She was offering herself up to the butcher to save his conscience. The silence on the deck was absolute. Jace took a breath. He looked at the upload bar. 45%. He looked at Chorus. No, Jace said. Chorus' smile vanished. Excuse me? I said no, Jace said, his voice rising, steady and hard. I don't trade lives, Admiral, and I definitely don't trade her. He stepped back in front of Valyra, raising his rifle. If I become the kind of man who sells the people I care about, Jace said, looking Valyra in the eye, then I have nothing left worth saving, and I do care about her. The admission hung in the air like a vow. Valyra stared at him, her heart stopping. He had chosen her. Against his own people, against logic. Chorus' face hardened into a mask of stone. Kill them, the Admiral ordered. The squad opened fire. Jace flipped the console table, dragging Valyra down behind it as plasma bolts chewed up the metal. Keep the upload going, Jace yelled, firing blind over the rim of the table. Valyra scrambled to the datapad. 50%. The soldiers advanced, moving with tactical precision. They were closing the net. A sniper on the upper gantry took aim. He didn't aim for Jace. He aimed for Valyra's head. Jace saw the glint of the scope. Vay! He didn't think. He twisted, throwing his body across hers. The shot hit him in the shoulder. It wasn't a graze. The high-impact round punched through his flight suit and shattered the bone. Jace was thrown back, blood spraying across Valyra's face. He collapsed, the rifle clattering from his numb hand. Jace! Valyra screamed his name. It wasn't the scream of a princess, and it was the raw animal howl of a woman watching her world end. She looked at him. He was pale, gasping, blood pooling rapidly under him. Fear, cold and paralyzing, washed over her. Then, it ignited. It turned into a white-hot fury that transcended anything she had ever felt in the arena. She stood up. The inhibitor cuff on her neck sparked. Her emotions were spiking so high that her biochemistry was overriding the dampener. The adrenaline flooding her system was toxic, lethal levels of stimulants. Her bioarmor, which she had partially redonned in the shuttle, sensed the spike. It rebooted, override detected, Berserker protocol engaged. Valyra didn't grab a gun. She grabbed a jagged shard of metal from the destroyed console. She moved to the soldiers. She was a blur. She vaulted over the table, covering the 20 feet between them in a heartbeat. She didn't fight with honor. She fought with desperation. She slid under the guard of the lead soldier, driving the metal shard into the weak point of his knee joint. He screamed. She used his falling body as a shield, spinning him around to take the fire of his squad mates. She threw him aside and leaped, activating her gravity boots. She ran along the wall, a streak of silver and rage. She dropped onto the sniper on the gantry, her boots crushing his rifle. She kicked him over the rail. Korra's hologram flickered, watching in stunned silence as his elite squad was dismantled by a woman armed with scrap metal and grief. Valira landed in front of the hollow emitter. She looked at her uncle. Her face was smeared with Jace's blood. Her eyes were golden fire. "You missed," she snarled. She smashed the emitter with her fist. Chorus vanished. Silence returned to the deck, save for the groans of the incapacitated soldiers. Valira dropped to her knees beside Jace. "Jace? Jace, look at me." His eyes were fluttering. He was going into shock. "The upload," he wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Finish it." Valira looked at the console. The connection was severed. The datapad had been smashed in the firefight. She cursed, a guttural sound. She grabbed Jace by his good arm and dragged him. She pulled him toward the maintenance shaft that led to the central core. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "You do not get to die, Jace Kincaid. You are too stubborn to die." She dragged him into the core room. It was a massive cylindrical chamber, humming with the power of the station's transmitters. She laid him down against the wall. She ripped a strip of cloth from her cloak and pressed it hard against his wound. He groaned, his head lolling against her chest. You're terrible at being a villain," he mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "Shut up," she sobbed. "Just shut up and breathe." She kissed his forehead, her tears mixing with the blood. "I am here. I am right here." She stood up and ran to the main interface. She tried to input the override codes she had prepared. Access denied. Biosignature mismatch. User is deceased. "No!" she screamed, slamming her hands on the glass. She looked at Jace. He was fading. The light in the room was dimming as the station's power failed. She needed an override, an absolute override. She looked at the DNA scanner. It required a royal blood sample, a live sample. If she used it, the system would recognize her. It would log her location. It would tag her as alive, and it would strip her of every legal protection she had. She would be marked as a traitor to the crown, subject to immediate execution by any citizen. She didn't hesitate. She bit her own thumb, hard enough to draw blood. She pressed her bleeding thumb against the scanner. DNA confirmed. Royal lineage. House of Khal Rosh. Welcome, Princess Valira. The screens flared to life. The transmitter aligned. Valira activated the camera. She didn't wipe the blood from her face. She didn't fix her hair. She stood there, raw and ruined, staring into the lens that was broadcasting to every screen in the quadrant. "My name is Valira," she said. Her voice shook, then steadied. "I am the daughter of the High Spire, and I am a murderer. Across the galaxy, the feed cut in bars, in palaces, in refugee camps. The image of the dead princess appeared. I hunted humans for sport," she continued, her eyes locking with the camera. "I called it honor. I called it culture. But it was just slaughter." She took a breath. "I remember their faces. I remember the girl with the red scarf in Sector 4. I remember the man who begged for his son's life in the ruins. I killed them, and I enjoyed it." Gasps echoed in the imperial court. This was not a deep fake. This was a confession. "But I was not alone," Valira said, her voice hardening. "Admiral Chorus, High Minister Valen. They built the arenas. They stocked them with people they stole from the border worlds. And now, they plan to use my fake death to wipe out the rest." She looked at the camera, tears streaming down her face. "They want you to hate. They want you to be afraid. Because if you are afraid, you will let them do anything. Do not let them." She leaned in. "My name is Valira, and I am asking you, I am begging you to stop the hunt." She cut the feed, the data packet, the full archives, the recordings of Cora's, the logs of the hunts, uploaded instantly behind her message. The truth hit the Empire like a shockwave. On the bridge of the Vanguard, chaos erupted. Comms officers shouted as channels flooded with messages. Some were calling for Vylera's head, but others, thousands of them, were asking questions. Younger officers looked at their commanders with sudden suspicion. Cora stared at the screen, his face purple with rage. "Kill her," he whispered. "Destroy the station, now!" The Vanguard's main batteries charged. In the core room, the lights died. Liz had routed the last of the power to the medical shield Vylera had activated over Jace. The AI's voice was faint, glitching. "Little Moon. Power critical. Rerouting life support too. Medical unit, goodbye." LYS went silent. Vylera collapsed next to Jace. The medical shield hummed with a soft blue light, stabilizing his heart rate, sealing the worst of the wound. He opened his eyes. They were clear, focused on her face. "You did it," he whispered. Vylera stroked his hair, her hand trembling. "I burned it all down. Jace, I have nothing left." Jace reached up. His hand was weak, but he found her cheek. "You have me," he said. Vylera let out a sob that was half laugh. She leaned down. He met her. The kiss was not like the first one. It wasn't fierce with adrenaline. It was slow. It was trembling. It tasted of blood and tears and the ashes of a life she had voluntarily destroyed. It was a kiss of grief, of apology, and of a love so fierce it terrified her. "I love you, Jace," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, Princess," he breathed, "even if you are a terrible pilot." She laughed, the sound wet and broken. The station shuddered around them. Explosions rocked the hull. The Vanguard was firing. "We are going to die," Vylera said, resting her forehead against his. "Yeah," Jace said, closing his eyes. "But we won." Suddenly, the wall behind them hissed. A plasma torch cut through the metal in a perfect circle. The section of wall fell inward. Vorian stood there, flanked by 4 resistance fighters in heavy exosuits. "Get up!" Vorian yelled. "The Imperial fleet is fracturing. Half the ships just stood down. We have a window!" Vylera looked at Jace. Hope, sharp and painful, surged in her chest. She grabbed his good arm. Vorian grabbed the other. Together, they hauled him up. They ran. They ran through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling beams and venting steam. They reached the hangar bay just as the Vanguard's second volley tore through the station's spine. A patchwork shuttle, looking more like a flying brick than a ship, was waiting, engines screaming. They threw Jace on board. Vylera scrambled in after him. "Go!" Vorian shouted to the pilot. The shuttle blasted out of the bay, the G-force slamming them into the deck. Vylera crawled to the rear viewport. She watched Freeport Station disintegrate. It broke apart in silence, a blossoming flower of fire and debris against the stars. And behind it, she saw the Imperial fleet. It was in chaos. Ships were firing on each other. The monolithic unity of the Empire had cracked. She sat back, leaning against the hull, breathing the stale air of the shuttle. She reached out and took Jace's hand. He squeezed back. She had lost her crown. She had lost her name. She had lost her world. But as she looked at the man sleeping fitfully beside her, she knew she had found the one thing worth keeping. The galaxy was burning, but for the first time in her life, Vylera was not holding the match. She was holding the water. 6 months had passed since the station fell, and the galaxy had not stopped burning. But the fire had changed color. It was no longer the consuming red of total war. It was the smoldering orange glow of a universe trying to forge something new from the wreckage. On the planet formerly known as Game Preserve 4, now renamed Sanctuary World Ethelgard. The rain fell with a persistence that washed away the old scents of pheromone traps and blood. Valira stood knee-deep in mud, her hands buried in the soil. She was not wearing bioarmor. She wore a rough spun tunic and heavy work trousers, stained with the clay of the valley. She was planting saplings. They were native trees, long ago cleared to create firing lanes for the hunt, now being returned to the earth. Valira wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her muddy glove. Her muscles ached, a dull, human sort of ache that she had come to appreciate. It was honest pain. It was the pain of creation, not destruction. Down the line, a Tellarite refugee named Horg was digging holes. 6 months ago, Valira would have viewed him as a target, a creature of interesting geometry to be dissected by a plasma bolt. "Now," she shouted over the wind, "you are digging too shallow. Horg, the roots need depth to survive the winter." Horg grunted, leaning on his shovel. He looked at her, his pig-like eyes narrowing. He did not bow. He did not tremble. "Then come dig it yourself." "Princess," he grunted back. "Or are your royal hands too delicate for real work?" It was an insult, but it lacked the venom it would have held weeks ago. Valira smiled, a small, grim thing. "My hands have dug graves." "Horg," she said quietly, "a tree is nothing." She walked over and took the shovel. She dug until her breath came in ragged gasps, proving to him and to herself that she was no longer above the dirt. She was part of it. That evening, the Council of Survivors met in the hollowed-out shell of an old imperial bunker. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and unwashed bodies. Valira sat on a wooden stool in the center of the room. She did not speak. She was not there to lead. She was there to listen. A woman stood up. Her name was Mara. She had lost her husband and 3 daughters to a hunt Valira had led 5 years ago. Mara looked at Valira. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "I wake up screaming," Mara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of theatrics. "I see them running. I see the flash of the lances, and I see you. You were wearing white that day. You looked like an angel." Valira kept her chin up, but her eyes were lowered. She did not look away from Mara's pain. She absorbed it. "I hated you for 1,000 nights," Mara continued. "I wanted to tear you apart with my teeth." Mara took a breath, her hands shaking. "But killing you will not bring them back. And watching you plant trees, watching you sweat in the mud, it does not fix it. But it is something." Mara sat down. She did not offer forgiveness. She offered coexistence. Valira nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. From the back of the room, leaning against a rusted support beam, Jace Kincaid watched. He wore a security vest over his flight suit, his right arm still stiff from the shoulder reconstruction surgery. He watched the way Valira took the blows, not physical but emotional. He watched her refuse to defend herself, refuse to offer excuses about her upbringing or her programming. She sat in the fire of their grief and let it burn her, because she knew it was the only way to cauterize the wound. Jace loved her for it, and he feared for her. Later that night, in the small modular cabin they shared on the ridge overlooking the valley, the silence of the domestic space felt like a balm. The cabin was nothing like the crystal palace of the high spire. It was cramped, cluttered with data pads and spare mechanical parts. It smelled of coffee and drying earth. Valira sat at the small metal table, staring at a schematic for a new irrigation system. Jace came up behind her. He placed a mug of tea near her hand, his fingers brushing her shoulder. She flinched. It was a micro-movement, a sudden tightening of the trapezius muscle, before she forced herself to relax. Jace noticed. He always noticed. "Bad night?" he asked softly. Valera sighed, leaning back into his touch. "Mara remembers the white armor," she said. "I remember it too. I remember how clean it felt. That is the horror, Jace. I remember feeling righteous." Jace pulled a chair out and sat beside her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her it was okay. "You aren't that person anymore," Jace said. "But I am," Valera countered, looking at him with haunted gold eyes. "I am the same biology, the same hands. Sometimes I wake up in the dark and I smell blood, rich and metallic. And for a split second before I remember where I am, I feel a thrill." She looked down at her hands. Then the nausea hits me and I want to claw my own skin off. But the thrill was there. It is woven into my DNA, Jace. I am a predator playing at being a farmer. Jace reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "You think you're the only one?" he asked. Valera looked at him. Jace touched the scar on his jaw. "When I look at the new arrivals, the ones from the inner systems who still have imperial accents, I get flashes," Jace admitted. His voice was low, rough with a shame of his own. "I see a uniform, and I want to snap their necks. I want to hurt them before they can hurt me." He squeezed her hand. "We are both broken. We were both made by a war that wanted us to be monsters. The difference is, we choose not to be. Every single morning, we wake up and we choose not to be." Valera turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. "It is exhausting," she whispered. "Yeah," Jace smiled, a tired, crooked lifting of his lips. "It is, but the alternative is worse." Outside, the wind picked up. The heavy clouds that had been gathering all afternoon finally broke. Thunder cracked over the valley, a sound like artillery fire that made them both tense. The lights in the cabin flickered, buzzed once, and died. Total darkness swallowed the room. For a heartbeat, the old instincts flared. Valera's pupils dilated instantly, shifting to thermal sight. Jace's hand went to the hidden holster under the table. Then, lightning flashed. It illuminated the small room in a stark, blue-white strobe. They saw each other, not enemies, not targets. Just a man and a woman sitting in the dark. Valera let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "The generator is fickle," she murmured. Jace laughed softly in the dark. "I'll fix it in the morning." He moved his chair closer. In the darkness, the boundaries of their physical forms seemed to blur. He wrapped a heavy wool blanket around both of them, pulling her close. Valera buried her face in the crook of his neck. He smelled of rain and engine grease, a scent that had become her anchor. They sat there for a long time, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. The storm raged outside, a reminder of the chaos they had survived, but in the circle of the blanket, there was warmth. Jace turned his head, his lips brushing her temple. Valera turned to meet him. The kiss was slow. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled collision of the ruins, nor the grief-stricken farewell of the station. This was a kiss of reclamation. It was reverent. Jace's hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Valera's fingers tangled in the hair at the nape of his neck. They moved together with a familiarity that had been hard-won. There was a hunger there. Yes, a deep, physical pull that transcended species, but it was tempered by a profound tenderness. They kissed as if they were trying to heal the parts of each other that words couldn't reach. Valera pulled back slightly, her forehead resting against his. Her breath was ragged. "Jace," she whispered. "I'm here," he answered. "What if—" She hesitated. "What if we bring something new into this?" Jace pulled back enough to see her eyes in the next flash of lightning. "You mean a child?" Valera nodded against him. "The thought terrifies me," she admitted. "I look at these hands, and I see weapons. How can I hold something innocent? How can I teach a child to be good when I had to learn it from a manual?" She shivered. What if they have my instincts? What if they look at a rabbit and see prey?" Jace was silent for a moment. He ran his hand down her back, soothing the tension there. "Then we teach them," Jace said. "We teach them that instincts aren't destiny." He kissed the tip of her nose. "And they? The fact that you're terrified. That's good. The monsters, the real ones, they're never scared of what they might do. They don't worry about being good. You worry. That means you understand the weight of it." Valera closed her eyes, letting the tears leak out. "I would want them to have your patience," she whispered. "And I'd want them to have your strength." Jace countered. "Maybe just a little less of the hunting humans for sport part." Valera let out a wet, startled laugh. She punched him lightly in the ribs. "You ruin the moment. Kincaid, I keep it real." "Princess." They held each other as the storm passed, two jagged pieces of a broken galaxy fitting together to make something whole. But the galaxy was not done with them yet. 3 weeks later, a courier drone arrived at the settlement. It carried an encrypted data packet from Vorian and the Resistance Network. Valera and Jace stood in the command center, a repurposed cargo container, watching the holographic display. It was a map of the outer rim. Red dots were flaring along the refugee corridors. "Chorus," Valera said. The name tasted like ash. "He has gathered the remnants of the Vanguard," Jace said, reading the scrolling intel. "He's hitting transport ships, soft targets. He's not just raiding for supplies, he's broadcasting executions." Valera watched a snippet of intercepted footage. Chorus stood on the bridge of a rusted cruiser, looking gaunt and fanatical. "We cleanse the stars for the princess," Chorus shouted in the video. "We avenge her corruption." Valera slammed her hand down on the console. "He is doing this in my name," she hissed. "He is butchering innocence and calling it an offering to me." She turned to Jace. Her eyes were hard, the golden iris burning with cold resolve. "We have to go." Jace looked at her. He saw the warrior standing there, but not the huntress. This was not about sport. This was about responsibility. "I'll prep the shuttle," Jace said. They did not go alone. They assembled a team that would have been impossible a year ago. A Tellarite heavy weapons specialist, a human sniper from the Resistance, a defector from the Imperial Guard who had thrown down his helmet after seeing Valera's confession, and Liz, downloaded into a mobile combat chassis. They tracked the signal to the dead moon of Xylos. Orbiting the gray, cratered sphere was the Obsidian Star, a derelict heavy cruiser that Chorus had turned into his fortress. The docking was rough. Jace forced the shuttle's airlock against the cruiser's hull, overriding the clamps. They breached the hull. The fight through the ship was brutal. Chorus had filled the corridors with loyalists, men and women who clung to the old ways because they had nothing else. They fought with the desperation of true believers. Valera moved through the firefight like a phantom. She wore a composite suit of armor now, scavenged pieces painted a dull, matte gray. No colors, no rank. She did not kill unless there was no choice. She used stun batons, gravity traps, and hand-to-hand takedowns. She moved with a lethal efficiency, but every strike was calculated to incapacitate. They reached the bridge. Chorus was waiting. He sat in the captain's chair, surrounded by monitors showing the burning wreckage of a refugee convoy he had just ambushed. He looked up as Valira and Jace entered, weapons raised. "So," Chorus sneered, standing up, "the ghost returns." And she brought her pet. Valira stepped forward, her helmet retracted. "It is over, Uncle. The fleet is gone. The Empire is changing. You are fighting for a graveyard." Chorus drew his ceremonial sword, a blade of vibrating monofilament. "I fight for purity," he screamed. "You were the chosen one. Valira, you were perfection, and you let this mud dweller pollute you." He charged. It was not a duel. It was a dismantling. Chorus was a master of the old forms. But Valira had learned something new in the mud of Ethelgard. She didn't fight for style. She fought to end it. She sidestepped his lunge, the blade humming past her ear. She caught his wrist, twisting it with the enhanced strength of her bio-implants. The sword clattered to the deck. Chorus howled, swinging a punch. Valira ducked, sweeping his legs. He hit the deck hard. Before he could rise, Jace was there, his rifle pressed against Chorus' forehead. "Do it!" Chorus shrieked, looking up at Valira. "Finish it! Show me there is still a warrior inside you! Kill me!" The bridge fell silent. The surviving loyalists watched. Valera looked down at the man who had raised her. She remembered him teaching her to hold a spoon. She remembered him teaching her to execute a prisoner. She raised her sidearm. Chorus smiled, closing his eyes, waiting for the release of death. Valira fired. The stun bolt hit him in the chest. Chorus convulsed and slumped to the floor, unconscious but alive. Valira holstered her weapon. "No," she said to the silence. "I am done making martyrs." She looked at Jace. "Bind him. He stands trial. The galaxy needs to see him small. They need to see him in chains, answering for his crimes, not dying like a hero." Jace nodded, a fierce pride in his eyes. He pulled the restraints from his belt. The trial of Admiral Chorus was the most watched event in galactic history. It was messy. It was chaotic. There were riots in the streets of the capital and celebrations in the refugee camps. But Valira stood witness. Day after day, she stood in the witness box, calm and unmoving. She detailed the hunts. She detailed the lies. She detailed the corruption. She did not ask for mercy for herself. She only asked for justice for the dead. When the verdict came down, life imprisonment in an isolation colony, it felt anticlimactic to some. They wanted blood, but slowly. The realization spread. The cycle had been broken. The monster had not been killed. He had been rendered irrelevant. Change did not happen overnight. There were still skirmishes. There was still hate. But the fever had broken. 1 year later. The waterfall on Ethelgard was a roaring curtain of white water, feeding the river that ran through the valley. The jungle around it was vibrant, a riot of green and teal. Where once there had been sensor grids and hidden turrets, there were now wooden walkways and picnic tables. Valira stood on the ridge, watching. Down by the water, a group of children were playing. It was a mixed group, human children with skinned knees. Tellarite piglets squealing in the mud, and tall, spindly children of her own species. They were playing tag. Valera watched them with a quiet amazement that never quite faded. They were running. They were chasing. But there was no malice. It was just play. She still half expected a security drone to descend and tell her she was not allowed to stand here, that she did not belong in the light. A group of older students, on a field trip from the new integrated school, spotted her. They whispered among themselves, nudging each other. Finally, a brave young human girl, no older than 10, walked up the ridge. She held a datapad in her hands. "Excuse me?" the girl said. Valera turned. "Yes? Are you her?" the girl asked, her eyes wide. "The Princess Valera?" Valera hesitated. "I am Valera. I am no longer a princess." The girl chewed her lip. "My history teacher. He said you used to hunt people, like, for a game." The other children went quiet. The uncomfortable hush spread outward. Silencing the birds, Valera felt the old shame rise, cold and sharp. She opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but a hand settled on her waist. Jace stepped up beside her. He looked older, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes were bright. He pulled Valera gently against his side. He looked at the girl with a wry smile. "She did." Jace said, "The alien princess hunted humans for sport, until one caught her instead." The children giggled. Some looked confused, trying to parse the logic. Some looked intrigued. Valera rolled her eyes, but she leaned into him. She accepted the line. It was a joke, it was a myth, and it was the absolute truth. She knelt down in the grass, bringing herself to eye level with the children. The tension broke. "It is true," Valera said softly. "I made terrible choices. I thought that because I was strong, I had the right to hurt people who were weak." She looked at the girl. "But I was wrong, and I spend every day trying to fix it. That is the only thing that matters. Not who you were, but what you choose to be today." The girl nodded slowly. Then she smiled. "Do you want to see a frog we found? It has 3 eyes." Valera smiled back, a genuine, radiant expression that transformed her face. "I would love to see the frog." She stood up, taking the girl's hand, and led the group down toward the water. Jace watched them go. He looked out over the valley. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the new homes that dotted the landscape. Lights were flickering on, not the harsh searchlights of a prison, but the warm, welcoming lights of families cooking dinner. He looked at Valera, surrounded by children, pointing at a mud-slicked amphibian with feigned solemnity. The monster was gone. The princess was gone. What remained was something far more complicated and far more beautiful. Jace walked down the hill to join her. As he reached her, she looked up, and their silhouettes touched against the backdrop of the rising moons. They were standing on ground that had once been soaked in blood, but tonight, it would only drink the rain. Monsters are made, not born. Valera knew this, but as she listened to Jace laugh at the 3-eyed frog, she knew the other truth as well. Love cannot erase the past. It cannot wash the blood from the hands, but it can shape the clay of the future. And sometimes the bravest thing a hunter can do is stop running, turn around, and let herself be caught by truth, by responsibility, and by the hand of someone she was taught to hate.